Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. In just a few minutes, we're going to be talking with Congressman Ron Wright. His flight was delayed, so we'll see if we can get him on before the bottom of this hour. And then later this hour, we're going to be talking with George Lynch, who is with Traffic911. I might just mention, for especially our Dallas listeners, there's still a good opportunity for you to have a chance to hear from him and from others on this whole issue of sexual trafficking at the Hope Center. So we'll be talking about that this hour. Let me also give you kind of a program note. Next hour, we'll be spending some time talking with Jason Benham. You may remember David Benham and Jason Benham, the twins, Flip Benham's sons, by the way, wrote the book a number of years ago called Whatever the Cost, and you might remember they were supposed to be on HDTV and actually had filmed a couple of pilot episodes for a home improvement show called Pay It Forward, or Flip It Forward, excuse me. And then as people started making a fuss about some of the comments they had made about the issue of homosexuality, they were removed. And so we're going to be talking about that as well. Even today, my commentary about fake hate crimes, you have fake hate groups and fake hate individuals, and they were, I think, unfairly pilloried and given, as he says in the book, this new book, given the heave-ho back a number of years ago. But this new book is entitled Bold and Broken, Becoming the Bridge Between Heaven and Earth. And they open up with a story about an individual that was very critical of them, and the natural reaction from two boys, twins, who are pretty competitive and fight each other all the time. Matter of fact, you might remember the last time we had them on the program. I do, because the other day Facebook every once in a while says, do you remember this? And it's like, oh, there was the picture of the two of them when we talked about their book, Whatever the Cost. They just give each other a bad time all the time. And as a matter of fact, his brother David at one point said, Jason, if you ever start being nice to me, I'll drop you right here in front of an audience, which I'm not sure he was kidding about. So nevertheless, they tend to be the bold, confrontative type, but they have found that sometimes when you are willing to be broken, willing to step back, willing to ask a question, willing to try to build a bridge, you will find on the other end of the people that are saying such horrible things about you that these are in many cases very broken individuals indeed. So nevertheless, we're going to spend some time talking with them. And then in the next hour, I might mention as well, that would be the third hour, David and Kelli Pritchard will be with us. They are the authors as well as co-founders of Axis Ministries. So we're going to talk about everything from sexual trafficking to family to how we can build some bridges to some of these congressional issues. And I thought I might just mention, before we do get Representative Ron Wright on, that we just sent a message out to those of you that actually receive our emails, and it has to do with the vote taking place today in the United States Senate. The Senate is scheduled to vote on what's called the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. This was something that was introduced a while back by Senator Ben Sasse and was reintroduced in large part because of some of the things that were said, for example, in the testimony that occurred in Virginia by the governor and others. And so, again, the bill would require that any doctor who is present when a baby survives an abortion, that they should provide the same level of care that would be offered to any other baby at the same stage of development. And I remember when he was speaking from the well of the Senate, the author, Senator Ben Sasse, said infanticide shouldn't be a partisan issue. Every single public servant should be able to say it's wrong to leave newborn babies to die. Well, we can go through that obvious statement to find that that was not the case, because one of the things that he actually called for was for them to actually give unanimous consent to this particular piece of legislation. But that simply did not happen. And so as a result, it was one of the reasons that he felt the need to push forward. So this turns out to be a lot more controversial than you would think it should be, because, again, when we talk about things like infanticide, there's really no place for us to even have to have this debate. But unfortunately, that's exactly where we find ourselves in the world today, debating whether or not there should be a child being allowed to survive in the midst of some of those circumstances. And so we want to, once again, encourage you to click on the banner which says Support Life, and essentially express your opinion to your two senators if you've not done so. The email that just went out says something like, did you see this message from Kerby? And it's written by our president, Warren Kelly, of Point of View. So that just gives you another opportunity to kind of consider that issue. And my commentary today is called Media and Hate Crimes. And personally, I'm glad that I wrote it, because since I wrote it, I've found my own organization that I've worked with, Pro Ministries, once again listed in the Dallas Morning News. In this particular case, is a hate group. And I think it's just an illustration of why what you have to do is exercise a very significant level of discernment. When we have a fake hate crime, the media just cannot help themselves. They're going to jump in instantaneously. They're trying to get ratings. There's going to be a lot of pressure on media outlets to get your attention, and so they're not going to exercise any discernment. If you look at the list that has been created in the past by the Southern Poverty Law Center for various hate groups, you will see nearly 4 dozen groups are groups that we talk about every single day here on this program. This is like Alliance Defending Freedom. It's like the American Family Association. It's like the Family Research Council. It would be like D. James Kennedy's ministry. Matter of fact, I just received an email recently from Frank Wright. Dr. Frank Wright will be on the program with us in the future, and we can go through this long list. I had a commentary that came out a while back on a group I'd never even heard of. It was a Catholic group, but they were listed there as well. And so it's just going to be more and more important for us in this world where everything is politicized and where there is a fair amount of fake news, fake hate crimes, and even fake hate groups, for you to exercise discernment. So let me, first of all, encourage you to go to our website, first of all, to take action on this particular issue, the Born Alive Abortion Survivals Protection Act. But number 2, on the left-hand corner, you will see my commentary. If you click on that, you will see in bold letters the word discernment, because I really do think we're going to have to exercise a lot more discernment. And even with this fake hate crime, there were all sorts of reasons to be a little bit skeptical. I mean, after all, why would a black man in a fairly liberal city like Chicago be attacked in the middle of the night? How would anybody even know who he was when the temperature was below 0 and he was probably bundled up? Did it make a lot of sense that they'd be wearing Make America Great hats and have all the things that they were supposed to have done? And then, of course, we learn more and more about some of the other questions that people were raising. And it's just, I think, important as you read this particular commentary to recognize that this is not a one-off. If nothing else, I've been writing commentaries on some of these subjects for years, and I just give you a few examples. One of a supposed hate crime against homosexuals, one about a supposed hate crime against African-American women, and one, actually a couple of examples of supposed hate crimes against Muslims. And in every particular case, they turn out to be fake hate crimes. So if nothing else, the lesson here, exercise some discernment. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Over Over the last few weeks, we learned why we must exercise discernment when viewing media coverage of hate crimes. Even though so many have turned out to be fake hate crimes, the pressure on media outlets to get your attention prevents them from exercising any discernment. That is why you need to exercise discernment. There were many good reasons why the media should have exercised some caution. Why would a black man in a fairly liberal city like Chicago be attacked in the middle of the night because of his race or sexual orientation? How would his attackers even know who he was, since he was probably bundled up because of sub-zero temperatures? You can look through the transcripts of broadcasts and read stories in newspapers and internet sites and never see even the slightest hesitation or disclaimer. Over the last few years of writing commentaries, I've documented lots of fake hate crime stories. Here are just a few. There was a story about a homophobic message printed on a cake from Whole Foods in Austin, Texas. It was actually written by a customer associated with the LGBT community. 3 black co-eds at the University of Albany said they were attacked on a city bus by white men using racial slurs. Hundreds came to a rally on campus to protest racism, but if you watch the surveillance videos, you can see that they actually attacked a white woman on the bus. And there are many examples of Muslim women falsely claiming that they were attacked and had their head coverings pulled off. Also, there's a student at Beloit College who reported anti-Muslim graffiti on his door. The police investigated and found he perpetrated the fraud himself. These are merely a small sample of people who have used fake hate crimes to call attention to themselves or their cause. This should be a reminder to be patient and wait for all the facts to come out. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. 2 brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Right, once again, we'll do our best to try to connect up with Representative Ron Wright. And if we do not do so, George Lynch will be with us in just a minute as we talk about Traffic911 and an opportunity for you not only to hear him on this program, but to also hear him and others live as they are going to be talking about some of these very important issues tomorrow night at the Hope Center in Plano, Texas. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. While I'm waiting for the representative, let me just take on this issue once again of climate change. If you have been watching any of the tweets or various Facebook posts or YouTube post by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you would recognize that she is convinced that we are in a bad way and the end of the world is only 12 years away, if that. If you watched some of the talking head shows, this got pretty extreme as well. And if I'd had a little more time and I knew I was going to have some time to actually play those, I might even play some of the clips where you just really do kind of shake your head and say, these claims that are being made by individuals, first of all, don't necessarily match with the reality of what we know scientifically. And second of all, some of them almost seem intended to be extreme to just try to wake people up. And I recognize, as a matter of fact, in my commentary that came out earlier this month, that we've had climate change alarmism for some time. But even before we had the issue of climate change, I mean, I talk about, for example, in a commentary that I did for February 7th, that you can go back to 1970 when we had the kind of the Earth Day. And the Harvard biologist George Wald predicted that the civilization would end within 15 or 30 years. Well, he's been off by more than a few decades on that one. Of course, you had Paul Ehrlich, very well known, that said 1 billion people would be starving to death by 2020. I think we're getting pretty close to 2020, and I'm not sure that's happening. As a matter of fact, just the opposite. We're raising more people out of extreme poverty than ever before. But again, you recognize that there have been some very dire warnings about the fact that the temperature will go up a number of degrees Celsius by the end of this century. Of course, Al Gore has actually said that in the near future, the oceans would rise by 20 feet. Again, near future, even if you take that near future as a decade or two, so far he's off by about 20 feet. Let's put that in perspective. And one that I quote in my commentary, that even back in 2005, there was a conference of climate scientists and politicians. This particular group met in London, and they warned that the Earth had as little as 10 years before it would reach the point of no return on global warming. Well, that would be 2015, and that would be 4 years ago, and we're still doing pretty well. So some people say, but we still need to reduce CO2 emissions. And so my commentary last week spent some time saying, okay, let's, first of all, I don't know that it's going to make the kind of impact that you think, but let's start with the premise that we need to reduce CO2. Which country has done the best job of reducing CO2 emissions? And as I point out in the column, people will oftentimes say, oh, I don't know, Germany, France, Japan. No, the United States of America would be that country which has actually been more effective in reducing greenhouse gas emissions than any other country in the world. Now, the fact that sometimes you can't answer that question effectively might say a little bit about the news sources that you have, because you probably, if you paid attention to a lot of the mainstream media, would certainly acknowledge that they spent lots of time reminding you that the United States withdrew from the Paris Accords. Probably spent a lot of time in the past talking about the fact that the United States never ratified the Kyoto Protocol. But they probably didn't spend any time telling you that we've actually, in this country, reduced CO2 emissions even faster and more effectively than those other countries that did sign the Paris Accords and the Kyoto Protocol and things of that nature. So that led to another question I thought might be an appropriate question, and that is, what country leads the world in total CO2 emissions? And again, the natural reaction, well, the United States. No, it's China. Matter of fact, China and then India would be third, illustrate the fact that those are up there in terms of CO2 emissions. And the biggest issue is that for every ton of CO2 emissions that have been reduced by the United States, 10 times more tons have been produced by China and India. So if indeed you are absolutely convinced that reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is something that desperately has to be done, your focus shouldn't be on, say, the Green New Deal in the United States. It should be trying to get two of the most significant emitters of carbon dioxide to get along with the program rather than to increase them dramatically. But I think the biggest issue that I've raised on this program many times before is, despite all these claims that the degree of the temperature is going to go up by 4 degrees or whatever I was hearing even on some of the talking head shows this weekend, the best estimates are that it probably is not going to go up that much, if at all. And more to the point is that if you look at any of these climate sensitivity models, and again, you have to take that with a grain of salt because they haven't done a real good job so far of making any kind of prediction. The argument is that if we do implement some of the Green New Deal ideas, and you'd have to do this in a draconian way because nothing is going to happen simply by chance. So you'd have to vastly expand the size and scope of the federal government to implement something like a Green New Deal. It would look at least as overburdensome as the New Deal that came under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But even if you did, it would only affect the world temperature by 1/10 of a degree Celsius. If you could get all of the countries to go along with a Green New Deal kind of program, it might reduce it by 2/10 of a degree Celsius. And so I think you're going to pretty much see that that is not going to happen. Number one, because it's not going to be very effective. And second of all, let's just recognize that when we talk about the way in which we produce energy right now, natural gas produces 32%. Oil and liquid natural gas production produces 28%. Coal produces almost 18%. Nuclear, another 10%. And those would all be banned ultimately. The goal is to not only get rid of those which produce CO2, which would be fossil fuels, but even things that don't produce CO2, like nuclear power. And so that would, if you use my numbers, say that in 10 years, in a decade, we're supposed to replace 88% of America's current energy sources. And that does begin to be just a little difficult to manage. And I think it illustrates again why even this weekend, when you had all these talking head shows telling us how dire the circumstances are, we need to bring us back to just a little bit of scientific common sense and provide an opportunity to have an honest discussion and an honest debate. Because one of the other things I pointed out in one of the columns is that if you even question some of this, you're called a climate change denier, which I thought was kind of interesting because Roy Spencer, who's been on the program with us before, Dr. Roy Spencer, said he just thinks that's a classic straw man argument because he says, I cannot think of a single credentialed, published, skeptical climate scientist who doesn't believe in the existence of climate change. But if, again, you don't toe the party line, then you're called a climate change denier on the par of a Holocaust denier or something of that nature. Well, just before we take a break, let me just mention again, we are encouraging you to take some action. We have the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. And I think it is just a reminder of why this is necessary because the governor of the state of Virginia, Ralph Northam, when asked about, well, the kind of legislation that was being proposed in the Virginia legislature, as a doctor, he explained that an infant would be delivered, resuscitated if that's what the mother and family desired, and then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother. And Senator Ben Sasse, I think, was very clear in saying that the governor's frankness, he says, is rare. There were no euphemisms, no weasel words, but I think it underscores exactly why we want to encourage you to contact your 2 United States senators. And those of you in the state of Texas, those would be Ted Cruz and John Cornyn. But those of you in other states, you could follow up on that as well. And if nothing else, it, I think, comes back to one of the comments later by Senator Ben Sasse, because he said it shouldn't be difficult for members of the U.S. Senate to affirm that a child outside the womb deserves the protection of our law. But apparently we're finding out that for some members of Congress, that may be too difficult for them. So if you want to express your opinion about that, we have made that available for you to click on that button and to contact your 2 senators even in this 11th hour. And we'll watch and see what kind of vote takes place in the United States Senate. And then, of course, if it makes its way through the Senate and goes to the House, maybe next time we're able to get Representative Ron Wright on, we'll find out his thoughts. I think I already know what they would be, but again, we'll get those comments. We come back, George Lynch will be in studio with us. We're going to talk about trafficking, and we'll talk about those issues right after these messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you listen to this program any length of time, you know that we certainly have talked a great deal about sexual trafficking. Matter of fact, we had a former member of Congress, Linda Smith, on last week. We have, on a number of occasions, had Noel Boucher on to talk about this. And, of course, just recently, We've also had some very important conversations about this because of the Critical Conversations meeting that is taking place tomorrow night, I should say. It's actually a dinner as well, and it's on the subject of human trafficking. Dr. Vanessa Boucher will be there, and we've talked about some of her work, as well as George Lynch. And I am privileged to have in studio with me George Lynch. If you're not familiar with Traffic 911. We have a link on our website. He served for a number of years, at first the president of the board and now the CEO of this wonderful organization. A very difficult series of issues, and we've got some great material here. Their vision, a world free from relational brokenness. So, George, looking forward to what you're going to share tomorrow night as well.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to come in and talk about an issue that's very topical. It's been in the news even in the last week.
No, it certainly. Well, let's talk about it right now.
Sure.
Robert Kraft, a lot of people know him for, of course, the New England Patriots, but he's down in Florida. And it highlighted not only the issue of prostitution, but the victimization, because it turns out, as far as we now understand, this relates exactly back to this issue of trafficking, doesn't it?
Very much indeed. And in the work as a ministry serving this population, we think of everyone not as the title of that job, prostitute, but as a prostituted individual, somebody who's been trafficked, forced, defrauded, coerced into a situation for commercial sex acts. And I have to say, I've been really impressed by law enforcement in Jupiter, Florida, and the case with Robert Kraft, that there was this immediate sense, as opposed to criminalizing those that were brought into that sting, they recognized the victimization.
Yes.
And were seeking services and doing the work to determine the victimization there, as opposed to putting handcuffs on people that have been exploited. And to really look at the issue, that is, there are the traffickers who are the people that have a thumb on somebody's head that are forcing them into indentured servitude or labor, but also commercial sex. And it can be adults, as we saw in the case of, I believe that's the case reported from Jupiter, Florida, that they were adults, and they're checking to make sure whether or not they're victims. But this, the victimization and recognition of the trauma behind this commercial exploitation is really becoming to come to light, and it's tremendous for those of us that have labored in this work to see our law enforcement teams, and they're doing some tremendous work across the nation.
Let me give a little history, because when we had former member of Congress Linda on the other night, Linda Smith, we were talking about the fact that I think the first time we had her on was more than a decade ago. And I remember at the time that after she would talk about this, I opened up for questions, and there are all sorts of people saying, wait a minute, I think you were just overplaying this, Kerby Anderson, and point of view, because I'm not hearing about this in the mainstream media. And okay, she's a member of Congress, so I'll give her some credibility, but I think you are engaging in some level of hyperbole. And of course, now we never hear that comment. The other one was interesting. She admitted that when she first got into this, she had never thought about, back to the point you're making, the victimization of those individuals, because even to this day, there are a few states where we actually prosecute the prostitutes, the sexually trafficked individuals, and sometimes let those who were soliciting prostitution off easier. So even to this day, we have that, but it's a lot less than it was many years ago. And she kind of learned as she was going through this, the problem that you just talked about.
Well, Linda Smith has been a leader for this cause as a representative, and now as the CEO of Shared Hope. And what a leader she's been to those of us that are in this fight, educating, equipping, being a think tank to really talk about this issue. And I give her much credit for the work that she did to help shape thinking, and that recognizing that this is not a likely choice, that a youngster at 12 or 13 may make a choice that this is how I want to spend my teen years into my adult years, and continue to be trafficked and exploited. And being wise around that has reshaped our judicial system, the way the laws that come from our federal to our state, and then how our local law enforcement, our district attorneys, our U.S. attorneys, and Homeland Security are helping in this fight to really bring a victim-centered look and say, these are victims. We don't charge a woman who's been domestically violated by a spouse when that spouse is the perpetrator of a criminal activity.
That's right.
And we need to recognize that. And this is an economic crime.
Yes.
It involves precious humans being exploited, but it is a supply and demand issue. And we've got to recognize that there is a supply of children, of young boys, young girls, young men, young women that are being exploited, and that there's only that supply of people being sold because there's people willing to buy.
Yeah.
That there's a demand side to this issue.
And boy, we've talked about that so often. Talking with George Lynch in the studio with us and traffic911.com. You don't even have to know how to spell it because we have the link there on the website. You'll find some great information. And I might just mention that if they still would like to attend, it's tomorrow night. It's at the Hope Center. Dr. Vanessa Boucher will kind of talk about some of the legal issues, but I am so thrilled that they have you there because you talk about the personal and kind of the redemptive issues. So talk about what you do there at Traffic 911, because we've been so focusing on the legal, but these individuals that have been exploited, these individuals that have been trafficked, they have names, they have life stories, and you certainly have some great stories. Can you share some of those with us?
Well, yeah, our organization is focused around domestic children here in Dallas-Fort Worth predominantly is our area of service, but we have prevention programs across the state. But in our work to advocate for children that are being recovered by law enforcement, we're part of a multidisciplinary team woven into with our law enforcement partners, the district attorney, children's advocacy centers, Department of Family Protective Services, who are often involved in these children's lives. Bringing all that together, we become the special sauce.
Yes.
We're a relational team. We have advocates that are on call 24/7. And when we get a call, our commitment to law enforcement is we'll be at your side within 1 hour because we care about this child. And that this opportunity for relationship to begin at probably one of the darkest times in this child's life. Scared, confused. Their trafficker has told them it's your fault. You made the choice. You can't trust the police. All of these lies and manipulations have been fed into their young brains. And to have somebody who's virtuous, who cares not to shame them, not to judge them, to meet them where they are.
Yes.
And begin a relationship that we hope goes many years so that they have somebody, regardless of where they may be, in a system of care, whether there's a trial where their perpetrator is being tried, it's a traumatic event. Having somebody that's going to be there, a mentor, a supporter, case manager, there's lots of services we're reaching out to connect for children. But what the biggest gift we can bring is relationship.
Right.
And I think this is what, God and the church is known for so long.
I would think so.
Humans connect over relationships, and you mentioned our vision of a world free from relational brokenness, and that really animates our hearts to be in this work because it's broken relationships that bring a child to being vulnerable to being exploited. So it perhaps an abuser or a lack of self-worth at their home and their lives makes them susceptible to be groomed online through a relationship, through social media, through websites. And they think this person they haven't laid eyes on is really somebody who's got their best interests at heart.
Well, again, just a good illustration. We need to take one of those mandatory breaks, but let me just mention real quickly that if you'd like to hear the whole story, Critical Conversations tomorrow night at the Hope Center. And again, you can hear not only Dr. Vanessa Boucher, who's kind of the expert on all the legal issues, but George Lynch as well. And again, if you are just now learning about Traffic 911, can I especially encourage those of you that are in positions of leadership? You may be a pastor, you may be a small group leader, you may be a community leader, just to know this organizations exist, because this is an opportunity, as they have done over the years, to reach out to the youth with this program. And when we come back, we'll talk about some of the hurdles and obstacles you have to overcome, which the obvious first one is since they haven't trusted any other adult, why would they trust you? Sure. And then what it takes to actually move from a time of being exploited and trafficked back into the mainstream. And of course, you also mentioned some of the other trauma of having to testify in a court. So you've got some other issues we'll talk about with George Lynch. We will do that right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Riley Bembry returned from World War I, a changed man. Upon his return, this former Army medic settled in Los Angeles and became a butcher. But the city could not contain him, and he headed into the Mojave Desert and became a prospector. By the time the Great Depression gripped the nation, other veterans of the Great War had found their way to Bembry's cabin, each seeking to escape the emotional and physical scars left from the war. Together in 1934, they erected a simple 7-foot monument atop a rocky outcropping not far from Bembry's cabin, but miles and miles from anything else. They chose a common symbol to honor war dead, a white cross, and dedicated it to honor the dead of all wars. When Bembry died in 1984, Henry Sandoz, Bembry's close friend, began to care for the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial Cross. In 2001, someone sued. A judge would eventually order the memorial hidden from view, literally covered with a padlocked bag, while the case was decided. First Liberty had the privilege of working with Henry Sandoz, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and others to defend that memorial. Before he was senator, Ted Cruz volunteered his time as lead counsel on the case. Because of Henry Sandoz, Ted Cruz, Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and First Liberty, that memorial still stands today just where Bembry placed it in honor of the dead of all wars. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
George Lynch in studio with us for a few more minutes, and again, we're talking about Traffic911.com. There are all sorts of misunderstandings, myths, misconceptions people have, and one of those is, as well, the only... first of all, we had Linda Smith on. It used to be, well, this has only happened in Thailand. It's happened in Cambodia. And this is where people started reacting. You mean it's happened in the United States? Well, even then, still people say this happens for kids that are runaways from bad homes. That's just not true, is it?
Well, the reality is that a trafficker is really a street psychologist.
Yes.
And they understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
And they will look for somebody's needs and they'll exploit it. So certainly those children that are living in poverty and have those basic needs of shelter and warmth and clothes and food, that's something that could be exploited. We see that happen. Mm-hmm. But as you rise up that scale from safety to the sense of belonging to moving up to self-worth, we're talking about youngsters.
Yeah.
10 to 12 to 14.
They're still trying to figure out who they are and everything.
And you live in a culture that's telling you got to be beautiful and handsome and this is what it means. You're looking for validation And unfortunately, social media becomes a place for validation seeking.
Yes.
So, just thinking of your question, there's a youngster I can think of that lived in a middle-class, nice suburban life.
Yes.
At 12 years old, had family, that professional parents at work, and they had some rules. And those rules seemed overbearing to a 12-year-old mind.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 children of my own. Some of my rules sounded overbearing at a time. Yeah. And so in her 12-year-old mind, to reach out and say, can you believe I have to do this and this? There was a perpetrator, a predator online who came and befriended and said, I remember what that was like, and became closer and closer, and ultimately set the trap and said, hey, you can run away and come live with me and be self-autonomous. Didn't use that word. That's probably a more adult or theological term, but that was the thing that said
something?
Freedom.
Yes.
I can be away from these onerous rules and live the life that I want to live. Little did she know she was actually running into the very trap. After a honeymoon of getting this autonomy and freedom, here's what you're going to go do. And for 2 years, this child was trafficked, sold right here in Dallas-Fort Worth and in other communities to 20 customers a day, had a quota to deliver of $1,000 of revenue off of her sexuality, her body every day. So you can just think, do the math, 20 customers. If you're making $1,000 a day for your trafficker, you don't get Arbor Day off, not even Christmas. So they're working constantly, and you multiply that 365 days times 2 years, and you talk about rape, abuse. At that magnitude, you start to understand the trauma that a youngster
and it's hard to even imagine that you are able to bring them back to something that even looks like a normal lifestyle. But again, maybe that's the power of what you were able to do, and the power of the gospel, and the power of God working in people's lives. Because
how true.
I mean, at that point, you're talking about a level of brokenness that I think very few of our listeners, if any, can even understand.
Well, when I first learned of this issue and kind of consumed the levels of trauma or thought about them, I thought, wow, how does somebody stand up yet again?
Yes.
And God was quick to remind me, I am the stander-upper. I help people find their source of resilience. And so but it's that faith and confidence that I've seen in my own life that I know, and I've watched in many young people and adults that become fully functioning, wonderful adults that contribute to our society. And that's goodness for us all. And those that find, a place of trust in Jesus Christ, that's a place of total healing.
Yeah. Again, you can find out a lot more at traffic911.com. Let's talk about some connection points. One is I just really think anybody that deals with young people, certainly youth pastors and others, need to know about this, because you just never know. You might run into a situation where all of a sudden you find out that this individual's thinking about running away. Or an example I used the other day, an American Airlines actual booking agent said these 2 girls getting a one-way ticket to New York, this does not pass the straight face test. Right. I need to find out. And that, of course, they were about ready to be trafficked themselves. So first of all, you need to be alert of it. But I also know that you have a youth prevention program called TRAPS. And I would think people that are teachers, Sunday school teachers, pastors, others want to know about that. So talk about that.
TRAPS is a prevention program named after the fact that we want kids to understand that traffickers are laying out traps.
Yes.
And what do you put in a trap? You put a lure in there, some bait. And that's exactly, they know how a youngster is going to be drawn into this nefarious behavior. It takes some grooming. And so our TRAPS program is a one-time opportunity for us to give some really deep conversation, interactive video ability for youngsters to go, this is out there. I need to be aware of this so I keep myself safe. Our focus is really being in front of at-risk youth.
Yes.
Kids that are really have more chances of falling into a trap, but we go into schools, youth groups, we do community outreaches just to make sure that we're all sort of this rising tide of knowledge helps us all be able to look out for each other. Because, if I see something and I say something, a life can be changed
For sure.
at the end. And our Attorney General has created a great video called Be the One. It's out on YouTube. It is a fantastic 45-minute documentary that helps you see the lives of individuals that were in their community, their school, other places. And they said, I see something. Those spidey hairs on the back of your neck stood up.
Yep.
And I decided to say, I'm going to report this. Law enforcement, the Department of Family Protective Services, they're equipped. They're the ones that need to go in and recover these youngsters. And then let's surround them with love, support, the care that it takes from a community, as well as advocate agencies like Traffic911.
Well, again, I just want to encourage everyone to find out a little bit more. And if somebody says, I'd like to have that in my school, maybe I work with a PTA or PTF, or I'd like to have it in my church or something like that, the contact information is there, right?
We have a Take Action tab that will direct you to, ask for a speaker. Our team loves to be out in front of the community to make sure that we can keep kids safe and community safe.
Let me also suggest that if you are intrigued by this would be an opportunity. I think they still have spaces available
I believe they do.
for tomorrow night. And so this would be good for you to send a representative or for you to go. First of all, you get a nice meal. It's really a great opportunity. You're going to hear from Dr. Vanessa Boucher, who, again, is an associate professor at TCU. I've had her husband on many times on this program talking about the demand side of that as well. And she really has done a great deal of research in that regard. And then you will be there as well. And so you'll have a chance to hear the presentation. There will be kind of a panel discussion. There'll be just some great opportunities for you to learn. So again, that is taking place at the Hope Center. So you might, at this point, this late date, might want to just call the Hope Center in Plano, or just type in Critical Conversations hosted by the Hope Center. That website will probably get you everything that you need to know. And those would be some great resources for you. So again, George Lynch, first of all, I just want to thank you for the fact that you are doing what you're doing. And it's just great that you're in that organization. Used to be the president of the board. Now Nick Pitts is the president of that board.
Yes, your good friend Nick.
Nick, who sits in this chair on Wednesdays. So again, there's just another connection that we're looking forward to as well.
Indeed.
It's just been great to have you here, and we'd love to do it again. But again, just before we take a break, let's mention again, Critical Conversations, the Hope Center. If you'd like to know more, we also, of course, have a link to traffic911.com. Everything you need to know is right there. It's one-stop shopping. Just go to pointofview.net. You'll have everything you need to know. Let's take a break. When we come back, Jason Benham with us. That's going to be fun. We'll be back right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend some time talking with Jason Benham, and if you're not familiar with him, let me bring you all the way back to some of you that have been listening for a long time. Remember when Marlon Maddox used to do interviews, and I also did interviews with Flip Benham? Well, of course, David and Jason Benham are the sons, and of course, if you are also a more recent listener, just the other day when Facebook every once in a while pops up, it'll pop up a picture. It had a picture of David and Jason in studio with me promoting their book, Whatever the Cost. So they are certainly well known not only to our Point of View listeners, but as individuals that actually graduated from Liberty University, played minor league baseball, but eventually got into the development of homes. And you might remember that HDTV hired them to star in a home improvement show called Flip It Forward, but then canceled it because of their stand on things like same-sex marriage and a variety of others. But nevertheless, their first venture, the Benham Real Estate Group, has exploded to about 100 different locations, one of the fastest-growing private companies in America. And so as much as we've enjoyed chatting with them about Whatever the Cost, this new book out by David and Jason Benham, again called Bold and Broken, Becoming the Bridge Between Heaven and Earth. And Jason, it is great to have you back here on Point of View.
Wow, Kerby, man, so good to hear your voice again. And you know, the list of topics that you cover here on your show is, oh my gosh, it's breathtaking. And you are equipping an army of people, so that's awesome.
Well, it is awesome to have you with us as well. And you two brothers do fight a little bit, and those of us that have, I have a brother too, so I can relate to some of the stories you tell. But there are times in which you've learned that just because somebody attacks you, and I get, matter of fact, just recently got attacked again, and I have a lot of sympathy to the first chapter of your book, in which, you know, people have been mean, critical, used all sorts of vitriol against you. And when you talk about this man in Chicago, I think it really sets the scene for the rest of the book, because sometimes, even though we want to retaliate, we want to defend ourselves, we want to be bold, sometimes we recognize the people we're dealing with are broken. And in our brokenness, if we reach out with love or compassion, you get some unexpected results. So share a little bit, if you would, out of that great story that starts your book.
Well, you know, shortly after David and I were fired from HGTV, I remember getting a message on Facebook Instant Messenger from a guy who basically spewed out more vitriol than you could ever imagine could come out of a human being's mouth. And I remember David reading me the message, and the man was just saying things that I could never even repeat. And, of course, he was a gay man, and he was just very upset at my brother and I, because we believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. And I remember the first thing that went on in both of us was, we're gonna debate. And, you know, I mean, well, we're ready to fight. But the Holy Spirit pricked our hearts as we realized that we didn't need to try to win a point. We needed to win a person. And I remember David felt strongly that he just needed to respond, and he did with, I see that you're speaking through your pain. So he reached out to me, and that's all he said, and said, just want you to know that we love you, and that regardless of our differences, that we would gladly befriend you. And the man responded not long after, and he responded, basically outlining his entire story, and it would break your heart, Kerby. He talked about the way that he was taken advantage of and molestation and, didn't have a relationship with his dad and just all these things. And our hearts broke for this man. And in the course of time where we conversed with him, we realized that he lived in Chicago. He was an avid baseball fan. So, of course, my brother and I playing baseball.
Yep.
We decided that we were going to get him front row tickets to the Chicago Cubs baseball game.
Yes.
And so we did that, and we surprised him with it, and he couldn't believe it. He was just speechless. He said, "Why would you guys do that, for me?" And we said, "Because we love you. We want you to know God loves all people. He doesn't love all ideas." And when we talk about God's boundaries around sexuality, we're not talking about you as a person. We're talking about the idea of sexuality, that God has the pattern for how human beings can flourish. And so he went to the game, and then I remember a couple days later, he sent an email with a Facebook message with a link to the Mercy Me song, and this long email or a message that he sent along with it that said, "I have been listening to this song for the last few days, ever since I went to that baseball game that you guys sent me to. And I want you to know that what you did touched my heart so much that I'm going to dedicate my life to Jesus Christ, and I'm going to leave my lifestyle." And David and I were floored. We thought to ourselves, just imagine this. We could have easily gone out there and tried to win an argument with this man. But by God's grace, overcoming our flesh, we decided to just reach out to him with love and compassion, not backing down from the truth, but reaching out to him in love and compassion. And you know what? In that moment, Kerby, by God's grace, because we listed several other times in our book where we weren't that bridge, but in that situation with the man in Chicago, we became the bridge that connected him to his heavenly Father, and it was something that will mark us forever.
Well, again, that's the subtitle of the book, Becoming the Bridge Between Heaven and Earth. And the story is even more powerful if you read it all the way through, because there's one point where you're kind of pressing him about wanting to get him the tickets, and he says, "I don't have any friends." And I love what you write there, because it hit me as soon as I read it. Can you imagine how difficult it was for him to write those 5 words, and even hard to write it now without feeling deep emotion for him? I mean, you begin to recognize the brokenness, Jason, that we deal with every day, and the people that are reacting to us, overreacting to us, criticizing us. There's a story there, and sometimes if we're willing to be used of the Lord to speak the truth, but to speak it in love, to build a bridge, not a barrier, there are some real opportunities for ministry, aren't there?
Oh, there's sure. And you know what? I should have contacted you before we wrote the book, because I need to use that. Be a bridge, not a barrier. That's great work right there, Kerby. You made short work of that. But it's so true. And if we recognize first our own humanity, that's where we come up with the term brokenness. Brokenness, as my dad would say, and you know my dad,
yes.
Brokenness, as my dad would say, is being submitted. You're submitted to God in a spirit of humility. And Dad would always tell us that the broken horses, the horses that are broken by the master, are the only ones fit to pull the king's chariot. The rest are left to pasture. And God wants us to usher in his presence wherever we go, but we have to be broken. We have to be in a spirit of submission to God and recognizing our own frailty and humanity and recognizing our own sin. And when we're broken, brokenness is simply meant to be the fuel for our boldness, because there are ditches on both sides of the road when it comes to standing strong for your faith. And I know you've seen this, because boldness apart from brokenness makes you a bully. So if you're bold but you're not broken and you don't see people in their humanity, well, then you're going to become a bully. And we've seen a lot of bullies rising up, and there's a temptation where, I've been tempted to be a bully, and times where I have been a bully. And we'll talk about the other ditch when we come back.
That's right. Bold and broken. We'll get into both ditches. This, by the way, is a new book out by Regnery, Salem Books. We'll talk about it with Jason right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Over Over the last few weeks, we learned why we must exercise discernment when viewing media coverage of hate crimes. Even though so many have turned out to be fake hate crimes, the pressure on media outlets to get your attention prevents them from exercising any discernment. That is why you need to exercise discernment. There were many good reasons why the media should have exercised some caution. Why would a black man in a fairly liberal city like Chicago be attacked in the middle of the night because of his race or sexual orientation? How would his attackers even know who he was, since he was probably bundled up because of sub-zero temperatures? You can look through the transcripts of broadcasts and read stories in newspapers and internet sites and never see even the slightest hesitation or disclaimer. Over the last few years of writing commentaries, I've documented lots of fake hate crime stories. Here are just a few. There was a story about a homophobic message printed on a cake from Whole Foods in Austin, Texas. It was actually written by a customer associated with the LGBT community. 3 black co-eds at the University of Albany said they were attacked on a city bus by white men using racial slurs. Hundreds came to a rally on campus to protest racism, but if you watch the surveillance videos, you can see that they actually attacked a white woman on the bus. And there are many examples of Muslim women falsely claiming that they were attacked and had their head coverings pulled off. Also, there's the student at Beloit College who reported anti-Muslim graffiti on his door. The police investigated and found he perpetrated the fraud himself. These are merely a small sample of people who have used fake hate crimes to call attention to themselves or their cause. This should be a reminder to be patient and wait for all the facts to come out. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. 2 brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Outstanding new book entitled Bold and Broken, written by David and Jason Benham. And again, we might mention also their earlier book, Whatever the Cost, Becoming the Bridge Between Heaven and Earth. 28 chapters. No way we're going to cover all of this, and that's why you need to get a copy of the book. It is published by Salem Books, which is an imprint of Regnery, and you should be able to find it in your local bookstore. But as always, we have a link there in case you can't find it, and I would encourage you to get it in hardback or Kindle. And you were talking about, Jason, the if you will, the 2 ditches on one side or the other as we travel down the road. One is where you're very bold, but you're not broken, and you end up being a bully. What's the other one, when you're broken and not bold?
When you're broken and not bold, you become a bystander. And this, honestly, Kerby, is where a lot of people in the church find themselves today.
Yep.
They're humble. They're submitted to God. They want God's best for people. But in reality, they're not willing to stand for truth. And when God's reputation is maligned in culture, they just shrink back. And it makes them a bystander. So we would say that on the one side of the ditch, there's the bully, and on the other side, there's the bystander. But God doesn't want us to be that. What he wants us to be is right there in the middle, which is where we become a bridge. That is when our boldness is fueled by our brokenness. Then we become a bridge that connects heaven to earth. And we know that ultimately the cross is what made that bridge, that connection. It was Jesus. But he comes to earth and he teaches us to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So we know that God doesn't want us to just pray that prayer. He wants us to participate in that connection, and we become that vital connection piece. And the way we do it, Kerby, is to stand boldly in that gap.
Well, and again, the way you cover all of this is you take us to different stories, on a jet plane, out on the farm. Share maybe a few places where you've seen that work. And, of course, you're very honest about the fact that sometimes it worked well and sometimes it wasn't quite as nice and neat as the first chapter of the book. Talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. And it's such a pleasure, by the way, just telling you as a little side note, it's such a pleasure being on your show. We're interviewed by a lot of people, but there's never an interview where the interviewer is so locked in and engaged and has completely read our material and engulfed in it. So it's always a pleasure being on your show, Kerby.
Well, you're awful nice. Thank you.
And I'll just tell you a quick analogy, and then I've got several stories that I'd like to share if we have time. But,
please do.
An analogy, my brother and I, we grew up. Of course, our dad was a pastor, and so we never went on fancy vacations or anything. We would always vacation at our grandparents' house in Georgia. And our granddad was a tree farmer, and he had a lot of buddies of his they farmed crops, peas and peanuts and all sorts of things. And so he would bring us out to their houses, and we would see their farms, and we'd check out their farm equipment, and we'd jump up on their big tractors. And on the back of the tractor, each tractor, we always saw a hitch. And in that hitch was a hole. And we would go into their barn, we'd jump on a tractor, and we'd see that there was a lot of farm equipment there too. Like there was a plow, there's a sprayer, there's a tiller. And all of these pieces of equipment, of course, they were only useful if they connected to the tractor. And so we'd look at the plow, and we'd see on the front of the plow was a hitch with a hole. On the back of the tractor is a hitch with a hole. And the farmer would back the tractor up to the front of the plow, and he'd get the hitches put together, and then the holes would completely align, and then he would drop a pin down in that hole, and that was called a hitch pin.
Hitch pin, that's right.
And that once that hitch pin was dropped down in there, sometimes if the tractor's big enough, there were 3 hitch pins. And you drop the hitch pin down in there, and once that hitch pin filled the gap in which it was designed to fill, the connection was made between the tractor, which was the power, and the tool. And then the farmer could go out and he could plow the field, and the work could get done. And as we were getting ready to write this book, I just remembered that, and I remembered that analogy, and I thought, oh, that's so good, because if you think about a hitch pin, you can go to the hardware store and buy a bag of those things, and on their own, they're small and insignificant. But when they're placed into the gap in which they were created to be placed, they now become strong and indispensable. They become a strong and indispensable link between the tractor and the plow so that the work can get done. You see, in Ezekiel 22, God said, I'm looking for a man who will stand in the gap on behalf of the culture. And, of course, we know in Ezekiel's time, God said, but I found none. And God is still always looking for a person, a woman or a man, a boy or a girl who will stand in that gap. And that gap is the disconnect between God and people. And that gap can exist on a number of different ways. It could be just the checkout person at the grocery store that you see every single week. There could be a gap between them and God wants to use you as a human being to be that connection. But you know what's going to happen, Kerby, is that you have to be bold.
That's true.
If you're going to actually fill that gap and stand in that gap. And so that's an analogy that really helps us see the importance of standing in the gap and being that vital connection.
I love it. Again, we discovered we could buy a bag of those bad boys at the store for just a few bucks. Same is true for hitch pins, lynch pins, all of that kind of stuff. Small and insignificant. And again, you talk about this idea of basically a hitch pin life and use the example of Moses. But in some respects, this is back to this idea that there's no small individuals. There are no insignificant individuals. Dr. Francis Schaeffer used to say there are no insignificant people, and this really is the theme of the book. You don't have to be David and Jason Benham, who almost had a popular show on HDTV. You don't have to be the head of the whole Benham real estate group. You may be in a very, quote, insignificant place from the world's point of view, but God wants to use you just like those lynch pins or those hitch pins that you guys learned about on the farm. Did I lose you? I think we might have lost Jason, so we need to take a break, and we'll see if we can connect him up. I don't even know where he is, but obviously either he has left us, or we have not made a connection there. So let me just mention, we're coming to a break anyway, so this is a good time to just mention the book. It is called Bold and Broken, Becoming the Bridge Between Heaven and Earth. And again, we've been talking with Jason Benham. His brother David is also the co-author there. So let me just mention there's a couple of resources that we've made available so that you can find out a little bit more about them. First of all, if you click on his picture, that will take you to thebenhambrothers.com. And so you can get some great resources there and, of course, order the book from them if you would like to do so, and I would encourage you to do that. And then, of course, we also have a link so that you could get it on hardback or in Kindle. And again, I hope that you'll just go to thebenhambrothers.com. You don't even have to spell the name out and everything, because we certainly have that available to you. And Jason, I guess we lost you there for a second.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened, but I was sitting there talking and nothing happened. So here I am again.
Well, and the point I'm making is, again, this idea of hitch pins and lynch pins and all the rest. And even as we're coming to a break, I know you would appreciate this, because one of the things we're asking people to do even today is the fact that there is a vote today on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. And whether your father or me or anybody else, we would never have ever imagined, first of all, that abortion would continue to be legal in this country. But now we're moving to a whole different level where Senator Ben Sasse is saying, look, if you even abort a child and it's born alive, you have to give it the same medical care as a child of that same stage of development. And I love what Senator Ben Sasse says. Infanticide shouldn't be a partisan issue. Every single public servant should be able to say it's wrong to leave newborn babies to die. But if nothing else, Jason, it illustrates again why you've written the book, just the need for us to stand strong in a culture that has completely inverted its values, where even infanticide is something that some people are feeling that they have to defend as well. So this is why I'm so grateful for your book. And if you can stay with us for just a little bit longer, when we come back, I want to pick out maybe one or two other stories before we let you go. Is that okay?
Yes, sir. Yes,
okay.
Sir.
Let's take a break. You have your action items. First of all, we have a link to benhambrothers.com. Go there. First of all, you can find out a little bit more about the book, and we're going to come back and talk about how you could also sign up to get some of the other material that is available to them. They have, of course, a number of videos that you can watch there as well, and I think you're going to really enjoy that. So we have that link, and that's something you might want to check out during the break. If you go to our website, you'll see that we have that link to the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. The vote's taking place today. It is amazing to me, and I agree with Senator Ben Sasse, it is pathetic, really, that we have a society where we have to actually say infanticide is wrong and even provide protection for babies born through a botched abortion. But that's the issue on the table today, and so we have given you some action items. And when we come back, we'll talk about a couple more of those wonderful stories out of this new book. It's called Bold and Broken. As I said, 28 chapters, just incredible stories that just remind you of the need for us to be a good witness before a watching world. And so we'll spend some more time talking with Jason right after these important messages. Stay tuned.
Roadside Attractions presents Run the Race. Two brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question.
It's all part of his plan, right?
God does love you. He loves you like crazy.
From executive producers Tim Tebow and Robbie Tebow, Run the Race. Rated PG, parental guidance suggested. Now playing. More information is available at runtheracemovie.com.
Jesus said you could find a person's heart by where they invest their money. We at Point of View could not be more thankful that so many demonstrate a love for truth and for this nation by investing in our common mission. Of course, the reality is our team, our truth team, is a small percentage of those who listen. And right now, as they say in sports, we could use a deeper bench. For those who have given, thank you. And if you haven't made that step yet, take one now. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Show your heart for our future. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back for a few more minutes. We're talking with Jason Benham, and his book with David Benham is entitled Bold and Broken, Becoming the Bridge Between Heaven and Earth. And I thought, Jason, just while I have a few more minutes with you before we let you go on to, I'm sure, all sorts of other activities you need to be involved with, let's talk about the reason for this, because you and I know that the world that we are actually ministering to is very different than the world of our parents, or in your case, your grandparents. And so as a result, at a time when everybody's in their individual tribe and everybody is in their particular identity, because you talk about that as well, and everybody is kind of defending their group but fighting the others, and we don't have any kind of civility, it does seem to me that a Christian that can still speak truth in love is going to stand out pretty quickly in our society, don't you think?
Yes, sir, and that's exactly why we wrote it, because we felt as though that at this cultural moment, when the words of Ezekiel 22 are just ringing in our ears, that God is looking for those who will stand in the gap, at this cultural moment, David and I felt as though that people needed to see real-life stories of those who did become that bridge between heaven and earth, and those who did stand strong, but did it without falling in either ditch, becoming a bully on one side or a bystander on the other. But we also share, I'd say probably half the stories that we share in there actually show you how we either fell on one of those sides or somebody fell on one of those sides, or we struggled to a point where we were able to stand in the middle and be that bridge, but we had to overcome that desire to be that bully, win the point but lose the person, or the desire to be that bystander where we're not willing to say or do anything. So right now is our moment. I mean, you look at what the New York governor, what the New York legislature just passed and what the Virginia governor even said out of his own mouth. I mean, this is a culture of death as we have never seen it before. And you think about the churches back in Nazi Germany time. I mean, you think some folks are still alive from that time, and they say that what they wanted more than anything were for Christians to just speak out. Just speak out. That's it. Just speak out. And so now is our moment. And David and I wanted to write something that would help equip people on how to do it the proper way, exactly as you said it, Kerby, truth and love.
Well, again, while we're talking about this issue of abortion, I got to go to chapter 12, Miss Norma, because any listener to Point of View, and we've been broadcasting for decades, knows the story of Roe versus Wade, and the actual Roe was Norma McCorvey. And your dad really developed a relationship with him. And now, again, if you're not familiar with Flip Benham, here's a guy that always brought his Bible, always was preaching, always out front of abortion clinics, and a relationship between him and a woman who was the actual Roe of Roe v. Wade and was pro-abortion and a drug user, and we won't even go into all of that. That story, I think, illustrates historically in your own family about the fact that we can really build bridges in places where it seemed virtually impossible from the world's point of view.
Such a good lead-in for that story, because what we learned at a very young age is that when God wants to touch the material universe, he does it through the portal of man, just as he did with Moses when God said, okay, I'm going to deliver the children of Israel out of slavery in Egypt. And he says this to Moses, and I'm sure Moses was getting really excited, waiting for the plan. And then God says, okay, now I'm sending you. Now you go do it. And if I were in Moses' shoes, I would have said, wait, you just said you're going to do it, God. But now you're telling me to do it. So God, when he wants to do something in the world, he uses people to do it. And our dad always taught us that if your theology is not your biography, then your theology is worthless. And to prove that to us, he moved his church office, because he was a pastor, he moved his church office next to the busiest abortion clinic in Dallas. And Norma McCorvey, the Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade, as you said, was one of the employees there. And he befriended her. His secretary and her little daughters befriended her as well. And we had Norma and her lesbian partner, Miss Connie, over to our house for dinner. Norma got radically saved. Miss Connie got radically saved. My brother and I drove a U-Haul truck to move Miss Connie out of Miss Norma's house.
Yes.
And we remember all of this. And our dad was a bridge, and he showed us how to do it.
Well, again, I just love the fact that at one point, your dad kept reminding you and reminding her of Psalm 34. Those who look to him shall be radiant. Their faces are never covered in shame, because anybody that is listening right now that has had an abortion, has promoted abortion, the amount of shame they're going to feel is significant. And so that is something else that you bring to the table. It isn't just how we build a bridge, but even after conversion, sometimes people so beat themselves up. Matter of fact, oftentimes, maybe that leads into our conversation about evangelism in just a minute. Sometimes people say, I just can never become a Christian because you just don't know all the things that I've done. And sometimes this issue of shame, this issue of conviction, which is important oftentimes for them to become a Christian, then haunts them after they become Christians. And that's another place to share with them that even though we're bold, we're also broken, and the ground is level at the foot of the cross, isn't it?
That is so true. And you know, that's why repentance is so powerful. Repentance not only makes you right with the God who created you, but it also releases the devil's authority over you. You know, it releases his stronghold that he's got in your life. And what he wants to do is then remind you of how bad you were. You know, he wants to remind you of your past. Well, when he reminds you of your past, all you got to do is remind him of his future and let him know that you've been forgiven. And Miss Norma was forgiven, and she dealt with guilt for a long time. But my dad walked her through that and said, no, you've been forgiven. You've been washed. You've been cleaned. You do not need to worry about what happened in the past. Now let's move forward boldly in the future. And that's a promise for every Christian.
One other theme I thought I'd focus on just before I let you go, and that is a theme that sort of runs through this is we, in terms of evangelism, sometimes have tried to say, well, I don't want to say anything that could be offensive to an individual. You know, we recognize that we have seeker-sensitive churches, and we want to just not necessarily go to controversial issues. But you seem to be really arguing, you and your brother both arguing, that we certainly don't want to be offensive, but in some respects, the offense of the cross exists. But if we are bold and broken, that is a mixture that even as we're speaking truth that might hurt or might be convicting, might be even off-putting, is also the thing that can lead to the repentance you talked about just a minute ago.
That's exactly right. I mean, we are the aroma of life to some and the aroma of death to others. What the person smells is not up to you. It's based on the nature that's inside of them. And what David and I say all throughout our book is don't try to control the outcomes. You simply speak the truth in love. Like if you don't really feel love for the people that you're speaking to, then shut up. Keep your mouth closed. Don't say a word, even if that truth is there. You know, Jesus forbid the demons to say Jesus is Lord because they were of the wrong spirit. You have to be the right spirit first. So first, if you feel love for the people that you're speaking to, then speak that truth in love. And when you do that, you don't have to try to figure out what the reaction is going to be. Some people will be offended. They just will be, because that's the nature of what's inside them. You know, the same boiling water that hardens the egg softens the carrot. We're not supposed to be trying to turn the temperature down, trying to control the outcome. All we have to do is burn hot for the Lord, and some will grow soft and some will grow hard. So that's our encouragement through the book. Don't try to control the outcomes. You just speak the truth in love and let God, let the Holy Spirit do the rest.
Let me just mention, just before I let you go, that we have a link to BenhamBrothers.com. And, of course, we've mentioned already, of course, some of the previous books, but I thought I'd mention them again. Whatever the Cost, Living Among Lions, and, of course, this one, Bold and Broken. But as people, Jason, go to your website, there are some great opportunities for them to watch a number of videos, to sign up, to receive some of the emails and various blog posts and other things. So talk about what's available as people land on your website.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because we do. We've got we had our web developer put every interview that we've ever done on Glenn Beck, on ABC, on CBS, and on Fox, on all of these. We had them put them all on our website, so anybody at any time can go and see all those videos and all the interviews that we've done. And here's what's interesting, and I think you'll find this really interesting, Kirby, is that David and I have had some pretty well-known ministries that we were partnered up with and doing some work with that did distance themselves from my brother and I. Some actually uninvited us from speaking engagements because of the way that they would be perceived. And so David and I specifically said, I want you to go to our website, because we're brothers in the Lord, and please coach me and tell me in any interview that you saw where we didn't have the right spirit, where we said something that was wrong, where we said something that was unbiblical or not truthful, please bring it to us and let us know, because we want to make it right. But if that's not the case, then why are you distancing yourself? And so yet we've yet to have any of them take us up on that, because they've always said, you've said nothing wrong. It's not your spirit. It's just that we don't want to be perceived the wrong way. And that's the stronghold today, Kerby.
Well, that's the problem. Jason Benham, thank you for being with us, and we'll do it again soon. The book is entitled Bold and Broken. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Riley Bembry returned from World War I, a changed man. Upon his return, this former Army medic settled in Los Angeles and became a butcher. But the city could not contain him, and he headed into the Mojave Desert and became a prospector. By the time the Great Depression gripped the nation, other veterans of the Great War had found their way to Bembry's cabin, each seeking to escape the emotional and physical scars left from the war. Together in 1934, they erected a simple 7-foot monument atop a rocky outcropping not far from Bembry's cabin, but miles and miles from anything else. They chose a common symbol to honor war dead, a white cross, and dedicated it to honor the dead of all wars. When Bembry died in 1984, Henry Sandoz, Bembry's close friend, began to care for the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial Cross. In 2001, someone sued. A judge would eventually order the memorial hidden from view, literally covered with a padlocked bag, while the case was decided. First Liberty had the privilege of working with Henry Sandoz, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and others to defend that memorial. Before he was senator, Ted Cruz volunteered his time as lead counsel on the case. Because of Henry Sandoz, Ted Cruz, Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and First Liberty, that memorial still stands today just where Bembry placed it in honor of the dead of all wars. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hope you enjoyed the conversation we had with Jason Benham. And again, let me recommend the book, David and Jason Benham, Bold and Broken, Becoming the Bridge Between Heaven and Earth. And the argument that they make in the book is that God does not use perfect people, because there aren't any. We're all imperfect in one way or another. All of us are broken in one way. And also, God, in many cases, really calls very small and insignificant people sometimes to be strong individuals. We use the example of Moses, for example. You can go to their book on Daniel and go there, although Daniel was in a position of greater authority, and certainly Joseph was. But most of the people that God uses are not people in positions of great influence. And as we mentioned just a minute ago, this idea of being a linchpin, or to use the better phrase that they talk about, the hitch pin, pretty insignificant. You can buy a whole bag of hitch pins for not much. Those of you that are farmers, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Ever been to a hardware store? But again, you would not be able to pull anything behind your tractor if you didn't have a hitch pin. So it's kind of the great illustration that they use, that sometimes what you think is small and insignificant, you can make a difference. And I know Jason had to go, and probably could have tried to keep him around for a little longer if we didn't have that mandatory break, but he was sharing something that has always concerned me. And that is, you find some people that distance themselves from people like David and Jason Benham or Flip Benham. And that is, I think, never been the testimony of Point of View. Marlon Maddox used to have Flip Benham on, and all sorts of individuals on the pro-life issue. We take on all sorts of issues many times that are fairly controversial inside the church. And so I, without hesitation, ask you to think about supporting us every once in a while, because there's some people saying, I don't know, we should even be talking about this as Christians. And apparently they've run into the same kind of thing. And so I appreciate the fact that as you go to their website, you can actually see the interviews, but then they've asked, and I love this, show us where we made a mistake. Show us where we said something wasn't quite right. And a lot of it isn't that we disagree with your style. Let's be honest. There's sometimes that some well-meaning Christians offend people because they're offensive people. They say some things in a way that is not helpful and maybe not even biblical, maybe not even scientifically or historically accurate. Okay. But lots of times I just don't want to talk about that. And so it was just a good illustration that they have faced that. And so this is why I was glad we could bring him on. And I'd love to see if they're ever traveling, if both David and Jason will be in studio again. We'll just do our best to try to give you a chance to hear an entire interview, because it is fun when they go back and forth with each other. If you've ever had a brother, and I have a brother, sometimes, we kibitz each other and we kid with each other, and they do a fair amount of that when they're in studio. It's kind of a lot of fun. But nevertheless, did want you to know about that, and that is one of the issues we are putting on the table today. And speaking of that, I probably have talked about this enough, but let me mention it one more time. That today the Senate was scheduled to vote on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. If you have not had a chance to contact your senators, we really do make it very easily. Just go to the website, pointofview.net, click on that button that says Support Life, and then all you can see is we've got some suggested content. You can, of course, put your name and address there if it doesn't already recognize you. And then you can begin to pass on your view on that particular issue. I agree with Senator Ben Sasse. This isn't even an issue that should be a controversial issue at all. As he said, infanticide shouldn't be a partisan issue. Every single public servant should be able to say it's wrong to leave newborn babies to die. But as we just mentioned in passing, and Jason did a good job of explaining, when the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, explains that an infant would be delivered and resuscitated if that's what the family and the mother wanted. Don't you love that line? And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother. A discussion what? Whether to let it live or die? I mean, that's just kind of where it is. And again, high credit to Senator Ben Sasse, who was talking about the governor's frankness, he said, is rare. No euphemisms, no weasel words. And so he was really convinced that actually when he reintroduced the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, that he could get unanimous consent. Well, he did not. And I've, in a commentary that has come out, talked about the fact that this is, again, one of those situations where you just wouldn't have expected it would be that controversial. And it maybe shows the switch a little bit even in the Democratic Party, because even as late as the 1990s, you had candidate Bill Clinton, then President Bill Clinton, talk about that they wanted abortion safe, legal, and rare. They didn't have anything in their platform on infanticide because there wasn't any need to do that. Although I do believe sometimes wasn't there a platform in the Republican platform because of the concern about the so-called baby does or something like that, going back to the 1980s. But, when candidate Bill Clinton would use the word safe, legal, and rare, he would emphasize the word rare. And now, of course, you have what's happened in the state of New York and Vermont, Rhode Island. Of course, we just mentioned the debate in Virginia. And it does seem like every time we turn around that individuals are doubling down on the issue of abortion. And, of course, we just mentioned a minute ago this issue of Roe versus Wade, and Norma McCorvey, who was the Roe of Roe versus Wade, who eventually first of all, became a Christian, became pro-life, and actually had been on the program with us before. But I'll just end with the comment by Ben Sass that it should not be difficult for the members of the U.S. Congress to affirm that a child outside the womb deserves the protection of our law. But apparently it's too much for a few members of Congress, so they do need to hear from you. And so let me encourage you to take an action item there. It's both our Take Action section and a banner. If you go to the Viewpoint section, you'll see that today I talk about media and hate crimes. And the reason I do that is because we've just been through a couple of weeks of what now turns out to be a fake hate crime. And I point out in the commentary that it's not the first time. A lot of times people say, well, that's unfortunate, but it's just a one-off. No, it's not. For now years, I have written commentaries that actually document some of these fake hate crimes. I have a whole paragraph where I give you an example of a fake hate crime related to homosexuality, a fake hate crime related to race, and a number of kind of fake hate crimes related to so-called Islamophobia, and just to illustrate that sometimes happens. And there is an incentive sometimes for people to do that. So the theme is best illustrated by the graphic there that has the word discernment. You're going to have to exercise discernment. There were reasons for the media outlets to do so, but they are trying to get your attention. So oftentimes the disclaimers, the caveats, the careful evaluating of the claim just isn't taking place because they're just trying to get you to read something. They want to get your eyeballs. They want to get your ears. They want to get your attention. And so I think the illustration I'm making time and time again is you're going to have to exercise discernment, because oftentimes discernment seems to be lacking sometimes in the media. And so that's why we encourage you to check things out. Don't always take, even at face value, the things we talk about here on Point of View. If you actually go to our website, pointofview.net, you'll see the pictures of some of the individuals we're interviewing, and then you'll see a button that says See More. When you go to see more, it then gives you a link to every one of the websites. It gives you, in this case, a link to Bold and Broken. It also gives you a link to some of the articles we posted. If you find yourself saying, you know, I wonder if Kerby has ever written on that subject, you can go to the section there that says shows or commentaries, and then you can click on those viewpoints and then do a search and see, is there something that might be something that I've written about, Penna-Dexter's written about, or that one article has been posted on. And so, again, you'll find all of that at the website, pointofview.net. Well, let's change the topic. We want to talk about marriage and family, so we'll be talking with David and Kelli Pritchard right after these important messages.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, MediShare members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with MediShare. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join MediShare anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time talking about marriage, family, and child rearing. And if you have comments or questions, we certainly do invite your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. And we have a link to Axis Ministries. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But David and Kelli Pritchard are the authors and co-founders of Axis Ministry. Their ministry and their mission is really to kind of create products and resources for people who desperately want their marriage and family to work, the one that they really dreamed of. They're really helping people deal with some of the challenges of marriage and parenting and really help them to be more experienced in that regard. They have over 50 years of ministry experience combined. In addition, they've taught and coached all sorts of individuals on how to really begin to get to some of these family issues. And there are some great resources. They have, for example, the book Going Public, which has helped young people and even the parents of the young people to thrive in their public school experience. They have an online public school parenting course. They have a mentoring course. They also have the most important thing to teach your child. So we've got a lot of issues to cover. So first of all, David and Kelli, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thanks for having us, Kerby.
Yeah, we're happy to be here with you.
Tell us the story for just a few minutes. David, let me come to you first in terms of bringing all this together, because you're talking about marriage, you're talking about parenting, you're talking about life, and there are blogs, there are resources, and all sorts of things. But give us a little more of the genesis of Axis Ministry.
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple way to explain is, you know, we were in youth ministry for 20 years. We were on staff with Young Life, and so doing ministry, and just more and more we found ourselves being asked by staff and by others to, you know, help them with their marriage and their parenting. And pretty soon we were asked to come speak at their church, and then, you know, it became this thing that kind of just kept growing some momentum until finally we spent the last few years on Young Life staff in a national role. Kelli and I were family enrichment specialists, basically trying to help Young Life staff serve out of healthy marriages and healthy families. And that in turn led to us, you know, creating our own organization, our own website, which is Axis Ministries. And, you know, again, that initial focus was just trying to help folks, you know, have healthy marriages and healthy families.
Well, and again, you've got a whole series here. Kelli, let's talk about that. You know, the most important thing to teach your child, and of course, the second most important thing. So you go through all of these ideas of parenting, discipline, just the whole issue of really focusing on how to begin the parenting task. None of us, when we were having that child come home from the hospital, we're given a manual, and in some respects, it's because we have, in many cases, had parents that failed us that we want to do a better job of raising our kids and our grandkids, right?
That's right. And, that might have something to do with the creation of our ministry. We have 11 kids, 8 biological, and we adopted 3 from Ethiopia 7 years ago,
Yes.
a sibling group. And, everybody, well, including myself, I'm going to be completely transparent. I really believe there was a formula that if you just did A and then B, you are guaranteed C. And boy, 11 children have really helped me readjust my expectations and what I believe about parenting. So we just want to be in it with parents and really talk about a biblical worldview and what we believe God designed to help our families work really well. And we just we love marriage and parenting and children for sure.
Well, let's talk about that for just a minute, Kelli, because there are families, and I've seen these before, where all the kids just come out of the cookie cutter. And so it makes sense that if one had piano lessons, all of them have piano lessons. If one plays soccer, all of them play soccer. But most families, and your family is a perfect illustration, come with different personalities, in your case, even different geographical origins. And so that one-size-fits-all type of parenting has not worked very well, has it?
No, absolutely not. And I would just say really quickly that there are some common foundational expectations and beliefs we have in place, but then the Lord has been clearly working on David and I to grow each child in the way he was made by God, his wirings and giftings, and that absolutely has looked different for each of our children.
Well, one of the things I also want to talk about in just a minute is the parenting mentor. But just before we get into all the specifics and the books and all those kinds of things, David, let me come back to you for just a minute, because you talked about your background with Young Life. And it does seem to me that there are some lessons that you can learn by doing youth ministry that really are helpful for parenting, because you've seen sometimes the kids who came from good homes and the kids that came from homes that needed some work. That's a nice way to say it, I guess. And in some respects, you gain some insight by doing youth ministry that the typical parent maybe doesn't have access to, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Kerby, one of the things that we often say, because in addition to our own 11, we've taken in another couple dozen kids along the way, just oftentimes brought by our kids, just saying, "Mom, Dad, we need to help this guy," and so even when our biological kids were very young, we were taking in teenagers, and so we've often said to parents, if you want to be motivated to raise your little guys, take in a teenager, because when you see what comes out the other end, it definitely motivates you to, get involved with some of those things early on, and that's certainly what you're talking about there is, in youth ministry, you see, hundreds and thousands of kids, and you do see some things at that teenage end. And, sometimes there were things that we saw that it's like, I don't want to be dealing with this at 16, 17. I think we'll start talking about these things a little bit earlier.
Well, and again, one of the lines that we use around here, and of course, most of our guests at one time or another have used it, rules without relationships leads to rebellion. And
yes,
you've had some teenagers that you just say, how did this happen? I mean, this kid that maybe you met early on when they were in the youth group in church, or maybe you were close to the family, and they were just delightful. But by the time they hit the teenage years, you just can't even believe what is unfolding before your very eyes. And so it's one of the many principles we're going to talk about. So we're going to take a break. Let me just mention real quickly that we will open it up for your comments or questions. But also, I want to, even as we go to a break, encourage you to go to Axis Ministries. You don't even have to spell it all, but it's very easy because it's on our website, but axisministries.org. We're going to come back and talk about some of the different resources. The Parent Mentor is something we're going to get into. They have a blog post which gets in more recently to everything from family meal times and finishing well and all sorts of mentoring activities and things of that nature. And, of course, the books that we'll be talking about and other resources, which I hope you will find helpful. And so whether you are raising your children or your grandchildren, or even if you say, well, I really don't have any kids, but you're maybe doing youth ministry in the church, I think you're going to gain quite a bit from our conversation. So let's take a break, and we'll continue our conversation with David and Kelli right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Over the last few weeks, we learned why we must exercise discernment when viewing media coverage of hate crimes. Even though so many have turned out to be fake hate crimes, the pressure on media outlets to get your attention prevents them from exercising any discernment. That is why you need to exercise discernment. There were many good reasons why the media should have exercised some caution. Why would a black man in a fairly liberal city like Chicago be attacked in the middle of the night because of his race or sexual orientation? How would his attackers even know who he was, since he was probably bundled up because of sub-zero temperatures? You can look through the transcripts of broadcasts and read stories in newspapers and internet sites and never see even the slightest hesitation or disclaimer. Over the last few years of writing commentaries, I've documented lots of fake hate crime stories. Here are just a few. There was a story about a homophobic message printed on a cake from Whole Foods in Austin, Texas. It was actually written by a customer associated with the LGBT community. 3 black co-eds at the University of Albany said they were attacked on a city bus by white men using racial slurs. Hundreds came to a rally on campus to protest racism, but if you watch the surveillance videos, you can see that they actually attacked a white woman on the bus. And there are many examples of Muslim women falsely claiming that they were attacked and had their head coverings pulled off. Also, there's the student at Beloit College who reported anti-Muslim graffiti on his door. The police investigated and found he perpetrated the fraud himself. These are merely a small sample of people who have used fake hate crimes to call attention to themselves or their cause. This should be a reminder to be patient and wait for all the facts to come out. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. 2 brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
David and Kelli Pritchard with us as we talk about Axis Ministries. Might just mention that David played football, college football, and also is Samoan. So, I bet the kids at a Young Life camp really appreciate and love you. And in some respects, you have that going for yourself in terms of being a Young Life leader. But this, I think, brings us to another issue, and that is sometimes your kids are really into sports, but maybe you weren't really that athletic, or maybe you were really athletic and your kids are really into computers and video games. Sometimes it seems to me, David, that you need to bring some other people there. You need to learn what are the bents and interests of your kids. But even if you don't have that ability, maybe you've got a kid that loves to repair cars and you don't even know which wrench to bring. That's where I think the body of Christ can help, and you can get them together with other individuals that can nurture them in some of the areas of this, because this parenting task isn't just what 2 parents need to do. We in the body of Christ need to come alongside and help any parent that is trying to raise godly men and women. True?
Absolutely. I love the way you put that. I mean, Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. And, we so often sort of leave that comment as only having to do with, when they're old, they'll come back to their faith. But I think that speaks to what you're talking about, that whole bent area of, which way does my child lean and what are their giftings? How has God created them. And yeah, sometimes as parents, we aren't necessarily the expert or the person that's best suited to mentor them in that area. And so yeah, the body of Christ absolutely plays this tremendous role in that area. I will say this though, and this is one of the areas I've appreciated my wife Kelli about, is she's been really great as my kids have moved towards and entered into those adult years. She's done a really great job, and we encourage parents to do this, of finding those areas where our kids do have interest, and get magazines, get articles,
yes.
Learn what you can about those things just to pay an interest in them.
Well, let's, if we can, talk about one of the big issues that I'm sure many of our callers want to deal with, and that is discipline. And one of your books deals with this idea of how to teach your child to obey your parents. So, Kelli, I'm going to come to you for just a minute, because the one thing you need if you want your kids to obey and respect you is what? Because that is kind of the key to this whole idea of raising up godly men and women who are respectful not only of their parents, but of people in positions of authority, whether it's teachers, professors, people in law enforcement. So obviously that has to begin at a very young age. But what would you share in terms of this idea of really providing some kind of discipline, as well as helping them learn to obey those in authority over them?
Yeah, it's really an interesting area right now, and I'm sorry to say that even parents in the church are now asking more about how we help our kids, be successful, rather than the discipline thing has kind of, in our opinion, wavered just a bit, and
wow.
I'm not sure exactly why. So we are kind of coming in through the back door saying, if you want your child to be successful, we've got to start way back with those terrific two-year-olds and teach them the power and the wonder of obeying, because we love each other. Because I want my kids to understand this time from 0 to 18 is a gift, and it's a time for us as parents to steward our relationship with our children well, because when they walk out our door, we're not going to be there to provide consequences and make sure they obey. And that transfers to their ability to obey the God of the universe. And so we work really hard when our children are young. And again, this isn't super popular right now, to help our kids learn to obey out of a heart of loving us. And that just looks different than I want my child to obey like a robot, which we can't do anyway, so that everybody thinks I'm a good parent. So I am the first one to say I am the firstborn in our marriage, A-type personality, and that's how I did start out parenting, to be completely transparent. I wanted my kids to obey so people would say I'm a good mom. And I quickly learned, and David is the grace of our family. He said, Kelli, we don't want blind obedience. We want to teach our kids why we want them to obey, who is teaching, who is the author and creation of obedience, and why that's so important. So we really start with a theology of what is discipline, what is obedience, why do you want your kids to obey, and it's super interesting as we're sharing. And parents love their kids, but it's hard for parents. I would say today, in today's culture, it's hard for parents to want to discipline their kids, because it's a really there's tension in that. What if they obey somebody that's going to do something bad to them? And so we've got to talk a lot about this whole obedience and discipline, and exactly what we're talking about, to be super clear we're not misunderstood.
Well, again, the theology of obedience goes back to Ephesians 6, Colossians 3, and passages like that. So it seems to me that, like you said, you're not looking for blind obedience. You're looking for them to accept God's word and to make that part of their own life, and also to learn that if they don't learn to obey their parents, and then they don't learn to obey their teachers, somewhere along the line, they're going to have to obey somebody, even if it's a police officer puts them in jail. So there is a consequence to disobedience, isn't there?
There is. There certainly is, yes.
And Kerby, that's where the whole idea of truth and grace even started. It's that idea of, we want to be all about the truth of God's word, but we also know that, Jesus came in grace and truth. And so how do we do that in a way that also remembers the grace side of the equation when it comes to parenting? And I think as we do that, you think of it in somewhat of a continuum. On the one extreme, you have the permissive parent. On the other extreme, you have the authoritarian parent. And we believe that somewhere in the middle there is a more biblical view that is an authoritative parent, where we recognize that we're the authority in that child's life. But as you said earlier, we're building relationship, we're parenting with grace, but we are expecting them to see us as the parent and the authority in their life.
And Kerby, I would just end this part by saying I always, no, not always, but I have learned to understand that even as I'm parenting my children, the Lord continues to parent me, and the grace and mercy that he has showed me when I have turned my back or said, I don't need you, God, or I'm going to do it my own way, he still continues to pursue me and desire me to turn and obey and submit and to yield. And that's what I want for my children. I want them to understand, again, the creator of authority and discipline and obedience, and why we have to work so hard to understand and then to teach and then to live that out in front of them.
Well, and again, I think the way we also want to focus on this is to recognize that you're going to have adult children someday. Anybody that goes to axisministries.org will see some pictures there of the older kids, and there is a sense in which they still can benefit from parents. I remember my oldest daughter, when she was at one point, said, I don't need a mother anymore. And my wife wisely said, well, I've got a mother and I still need her. By a year later, she said, you're my best friend. So sometimes they go through these stages, But we're not talking about something where you have such, lay down the law and then you lose them forever, or you're permissive and eventually they're going to come back. There is that very significant balance in there. So let's take a break.
Yes.
I do want to give some of you that are listening a chance to join our conversation. And one of the questions I do want to put on the table is, have you noticed this as well? Some of us that are a little bit older remember hearing, the strong-willed child, Dare to Discipline, all the books by Dr. Jim Dobson and others. Of course, I know you guys have been on Focus on the Family's radio show and things like that. But it is kind of intriguing to see that now that isn't being emphasized as much in the church. And I would certainly love to hear comments from any of our listeners about what they may have noticed. Now, I'm not talking about the meltdown in front of the checkout counter where all the candy is there, because, any kid probably will have at one time or another done something like that. But are you noticing a lack of discipline, a lack of respect, a lack of civility, a lack of any kind of relationship? And that, I think, is another very important issue being addressed by what is available at Axis Ministries. Then when I come back, I want to talk about this parent mentoring podcast, because maybe you need to say, okay, I need more than just a book. Maybe I need to listen to a podcast. I need kind of a refresher course. I need maybe a 10,000-mile wheel alignment. And so if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, we will certainly get into those conversations as well. And if you'd like to know more, of course, axisministries.org. But if you'd like to join the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. 1-800-351-1212. David and Kelli Pritchard, they'll be back with us right after this.
Question, do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about Medi-Share.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With Medi-Share, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with Medi-Share. And they actually like Medi-Share more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of Medi-Share.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder Medi-Share is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
David and Kelli Pritchard with us as we talk about Axis Ministries. And David, for just a minute, let's, if we can, talk about some of the resources on your website, because we really want to drive people there. There is the Parent Mentor. We're going to get into that more in just a little bit. So resources, a blog, and a variety of other ways in which people can connect up. But let's, if we can, just talk about some of those resources, because I know that people are going to say, well, I'd like to get a book. I'd like to get a podcast. I'd like to know a little bit more about your blog, because I'm looking for help. So what do they find when they land on your website?
Yeah, so they have access to, obviously, some of the resources. Like we have a book that we wrote a few years ago called Going Public, Your Child Can Thrive in Public School.
Right.
And that's one of the areas that I think has become one of our areas of expertise. In some ways, by default, when you have 11 kids and they're all in public school, you learn to navigate that world. And so we have that book, and then we also have some online books. You mentioned 3 most important things to teach your child, and that falls in those ebooks that we have available. And then we also, as you mentioned, have a podcast, The Parent Mentor. But we are really excited. We're getting ready to launch a new podcast that is specifically aimed at the public school parenting world, and it's going to be called the Public School Parenting Podcast. And so that's going to launch here in just the next few weeks. And then we do have a public school parenting course, online course that we have at our website as well.
Well, so again, lots of great resources and available at axisministries.org. There's a contact us, because if people would like to have you come and speak, maybe to kick off some parenting seminar that they were going to do, or to have a conference or something of that nature, is that a possibility as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And we do. We've done keynote type addresses, but we've also done the entire parenting conference. We do a parenting conference called The 3 Most Important Things to Teach Your Child.
So again, all sorts of resources at axisministries.org. And one of the questions I put on the table, and we had a little trouble with getting some people online, so I'll open up the phones again, 1-800-351-1212. Love to get your thoughts about there's just seemingly the lack of discipline, even sometimes inside the church. We certainly have seen it outside the church. And David, one of the questions I might have is, in light of what you and Kelli were saying, is it possible that we also maybe have radically changed our view of what it means to be a parent? That I'm supposed to be my child's buddy. I'm supposed to be my child's best friend. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a close friendship with your kids, but it does seem to me that sometimes when I want to be their buddy, I don't want to correct them. When I want to be their buddy, I don't want to put them in any more stress, since they already seem to be pretty stressed out anyway. And I think in some respects, aren't we calling for parents to come back and actually act like parents?
Yeah, and I think, there's so many things that factor into that, and, it's certainly too many to unpack totally here, but, I think the piece you're hitting on is certainly a big part of it, the fear of just, losing them as a friend, or they won't love me as much, which when you look at the research, or you think of all the stories we have from our own life, the teachers, the adults that we respect the most are the ones that are hardest on us. And so I think, we can quickly get parents to sort of, don't just dismiss that. That's not accurate. You aren't going to lose your kids, the relationship with your kids, just because you are being a parent. But I think the bigger one right now in our culture is it goes counterculture, and I don't want to, try to, get all the political hot buttons, but, when you think of the things like tolerance and that conversation, trying to navigate that as a parent, again, starts to move you into areas where, you just don't want to, there's fear in, am I supposed to be doing this? Which is why we try to bring parents back to, as you mentioned earlier, Ephesians 6, and say, no, we are called to do this as parents. We just have to learn how to do this with truth and grace. How do we do what God's calling us to do and be their parent, but do it in a loving, graceful way?
Well, let's see if we can talk about your previous book, Going Public, or even some of the parenting material that you have there, because it does seem to me that David and Kelli, we are talking about really having to counter program, because if indeed the values that you're going to hear about in a public school are going to be tolerance, pluralism, and the rest, and the idea of truth, respect, dignity, purity, integrity, sometimes those aren't elevated as they maybe were in previous generations. So it does seem to me that all parents are going to have to think about how to sort of counter program to some of the things that are happening in the culture. And even if your kids aren't in the public schools, maybe they're going to a Christian school, maybe you're even homeschooling, they still live in this culture. They still have their cell phones. They still have their smartphones. They still have access to computers. So it seems to me that that parenting task is greater than it's ever been, simply to counter program from some of the false ideas out there in society.
You're right, and I would say, Kerby, again, that's why we love working with parents so much, because we want to bring them back to a foundational truth that God is bigger than all that's going on out in our culture. I think sometimes we can feel like it's never been like this in the entire world, in the entire history of time, but the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. And I realize there weren't smartphones in the biblical times, but we're talking about a sovereign God that loves us and has a plan for how he wants us to do life. And when I think about even talking about some of these hard issues with our kids, we first and foremost want to create a place where our kids can come to the table and feel like they can say, I don't know what I think about this, or I disagree, or I'm not sure this is how I'm going to do it when I grow up. And we don't get stumped by that or get angry or feel defeated, but we say, tell me more about that. Tell me what's happening that would make you think you might want to go in that direction, because it's one of the number one things that we're hearing from these deconversion, if you will, people, is that we could never ask a question. We could never doubt. We could never disagree. And so I'm pleading with Christian parents to not change truth, to not stop going to God's Word, to not stop having a biblical worldview about our families, but to create a place in our home where we can be honest and transparent and even say, you know, I didn't come to Christ. And this is true about me. I didn't come to Christ till I was a senior in high school, and I didn't come from a family that talked much about these faith issues. And there are a lot of things I wish I could go back and do differently. And so parents today get all the richness of that experience, but again, we can't parent perfectly, but we want to create relationships where kids feel safe enough to say, I don't really like how the church responded to the gay community in the beginning. And I can say, you're right. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how our church could do this in a loving way and still stay to the truth of what we believe God's Word says about this.
And Kerby, more directly to you, part of your question about the whole public school piece, because we would absolutely agree when you look at what's going on in the public school in general. It can be pretty frightening, but we have a couple things that we often say to parents. One of them is what happens in your home far outweighs what happens out there, and that would include in the public school. But I think, the thing that we try to remind ourselves and we try to remind other believers about is 90% of kids in America are in the public school. And so however we want to look at it, we just need to know that they are there. And so how are we able to help parents be in that place and yet maintain, not just maintain, but thrive and grow their faith? And that's really what we're called to as believers, right? And so we just think as parents, we have the ability to do what we've been talking about, which is to be strong parents, the parents that God has called us to be with grace, but we're also able to do that in a setting like the public school or private school or homeschool. It doesn't matter, but certainly as we think of public school, that all sorts of pictures of things can come up in our head, and it can drive us into a place of fear instead of parenting from a position, as Kelly said, recognizing that God's bigger than all of that.
Yes.
And I would say lastly, Kerby, in this, that we want to just hit home hard that parents are the first and best disciplers of their children. And we want to set them up at Axis Ministries to really win in that we want you to understand what that means as you parent, as you do life with your kids. You are the first and best discipler. And as your first response is going to inform your kids of whether or not this is a safe place to talk about sexuality or money or bullying or, gender issues, all of that stuff. And we want parents to be well equipped as the first and best disciplers of their children.
Well, let's take a break. We will continue our conversation with David and Kelli Pritchard right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Riley Bembry returned from World War I, a changed man. Upon his return, this former Army medic settled in Los Angeles and became a butcher. But the city could not contain him, and he headed into the Mojave Desert and became a prospector. By the time the Great Depression gripped the nation, other veterans of the Great War had found their way to Bembry's cabin, each seeking to escape the emotional and physical scars left from the war. Together in 1934, they erected a simple 7-foot monument atop a rocky outcropping not far from Bembry's cabin, but miles and miles from anything else. They chose a common symbol to honor war dead, a white cross, and dedicated it to honor the dead of all wars. When Bembry died in 1984, Henry Sandoz, Bembry's close friend, began to care for the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial Cross. In 2001, someone sued. A judge would eventually order the memorial hidden from view, literally covered with a padlocked bag, while the case was decided. First Liberty had the privilege of working with Henry Sandoz, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and others to defend that memorial. Before he was senator, Ted Cruz volunteered his time as lead counsel on the case. Because of Henry Sandoz, Ted Cruz, Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and First Liberty, that memorial still stands today just where Bembry placed it in honor of the dead of all wars. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with David and Kelli Pritchard. Again, it's axisministries.org. You can find it on our website, pointofview.net. And David and Kelli, for just a minute, I thought we might just talk about how what you're really talking about is keeping channels of communication open. When your children are young and they ask about sexuality, Mommy, where do babies come from? You know, if you react or you say, well, we don't talk about this, or you don't use the proper words or whatever, then it sort of closes down those channels of communication so that later when in their mind they're thinking, well, I don't see what's wrong with a boy becoming a girl, transgender. I don't think anything's wrong if you're a homosexual. They won't say that to you because you have no channel of communication. And one of the things we've noticed in some of the surveys we've done is that some of these Christian kids kind of live double lives. They'll pretend to be Christian on the outside. They'll go to the Christian youth group because, after all, that's what I'm supposed to do. They won't pick a fight. They won't raise any kind of controversial issue with the youth leader or with their parents. Then they head off to college and say, now I'm going to just believe and do everything I want to do. And so if you don't have those channels of communication, or if you close them down by saying, now, we can't ask that kind of question, or that's not something a Christian would ever think, you're just going to lose those parenting opportunities, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think, the reality is most parents won't say those words like that, but we send the message in other more subtle ways.
Yes.
So there's two phrases we teach parents to say. One is to simply say, that's interesting, tell me more. And that's so that when because it usually starts something pretty innocent. Your toddler or your 5-year-old, your kindergartner comes home from school and they say some word, they drop the F-bomb. They don't even know what it means, but they heard somebody say it. And what happens is if we react to that, like, oh my goodness, what are you doing? They start to learn this, they start to receive this message that says this isn't a safe place to bring new things to. And so we tell parents, practice saying, oh, that's interesting, tell me more. So that whenever they say something startling or shocking, instead of reacting, you simply say, well, that's interesting, tell me more. And it creates a space to continue to have that conversation. And then we tell them, parents, as they get older, practice saying, we love you and we're going to get through this. So that, picture the phone ringing at 2 a.m. and whatever they're going to say to you, the first thing out of your mouth is, we love you and we're going to get through this. Again, it's not that as parents we ever say to them, we can't talk about this. What we say to them is in our actions and in our reaction is we say to them, this isn't really a safe place for you to come. And we want to send the opposite response to them so that, again, they get used to coming to us with those more shocking conversations.
Yes. And again, lots of times it seems to happen during carpool. And they say something and you really drive off the road, even if you're not careful. So you've just got to be ready for those. And again, your initial go ahead.
That's why we say practice those sayings when it's calm and there's nobody around. Look in the mirror and say, that's interesting. Tell me more, so that you don't crash the car.
But again, how they catch you off guard, and it seems like, or they're the conversation, maybe even intentionally brought up at 9 o'clock at night when they're supposed to be going to bed, so that they know that they're going to extend bedtime and those kinds of things. So there's just all sorts of kind of key issues. But it does seem to me that communication is really key. And even one of the blog posts you have is mealtime. One of the things we've heard from a variety of guests that we've had on the program who have addressed this issue of this digital world is that they just say, no cell phones, no smartphones at the table, because it may be the only time where everybody's sort of looking at each other face to face. And you know as well as I do that you go into almost any restaurant today and you may have 2 parents and 2 kids sitting across from each other and everyone's in their phone. And then we wonder why we don't have any kind of relationship skills that we have within our marriages and in our families.
Mm-hmm. You're so right, Kerby. And, again, from just our experience, the place we start is with parents, because we, again, in full transparency, can be guilty of that ourselves. So in a family meeting a long time ago, we started this conversation and invited our kids into it and said, what kind of a family do we want to be around this area of technology? And one of them said right away, we hate it when you pick us up and you're on the phone, or we hate it when you're at the game and we see that you're on the phone. And we repented with them and we said, you're right. We are so sorry. Please forgive us. And then I just said, and it doesn't feel very good when people walk in the house on the phone or with earphones. So a lot of times you'll see our kids or even David out in the car finishing a conversation information so when he walks into our home, he's unplugged and ready to engage. So, again, we want to give parents tools, equip them to make this not about making more rules around cell phones, but to say, kids, what kind of a family do we want to be? You help us. We want to be a family that loves each other and communicates and that we know you and you know us. And how do you think the best way to do that is? It's super interesting when you ask good questions like that to your children.
Sounds very good. Just before we run out of time, let's talk about the parent mentor as well as some of the other resources. And then this new event for any of our listeners that have young people in the public schools. So how can they get some of the resources that you've already produced? And then how can they sign up to receive some of the ones that you are now in the process of producing?
Yeah, the easiest way is just to go to axisministries.org, and there's a link there to sign up for the Parent Mentor, and you'll get the weekly blog as well as a link to our podcast. And then, as I said, we're going to be launching a new podcast, and all that information will be coming out here in the next couple of weeks.
And so, again, people can go to that website. If they like to schedule you to speak, that is another opportunity. And, again, talk about some of the resources, because there are some great resources here. The 3 things to teach your kids, also this idea of disciplining with grace. You even have kind of an effective rite of passage resource. Talk about some of those, because those are resources we haven't mentioned too much about, but I think they might be helpful to some of our listeners as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, rites of passage is one of my all-time favorites because we've kind of missed that in our culture in terms of telling our children, when do you become a man or when do you become a woman? And we have a great list of resources, but again, our favorite is Raising a Modern-Day Knight and Raising a Modern-Day Princess, and I know that language isn't great with everybody, but the concept of gathering a group of men or a group of women around your son or daughter and talking about what it means to now be a woman and what it now means to be a man. I know for me, Kerby, David just did great work coaching me and talking to me about how I talk to my 13-year-old boy after the rite of passage was important, because I could nag and be disrespectful to him, and it would feel just like it does to my husband. And so I had to kind of turn a corner and remember to treat him. He's a young man who's still in need of parenting, but my parenting needed to change after that first rite of passage. So there's some really fun and helpful things and meaningful things that we talk about with rite of passage.
And Kerby, I think that the 3 most important things to teach your child is one of our key conversations and resources that we have, because, in this conversation around parenting, there's 75,000 books have been written, and that doesn't include blog posts and all those other things. And so it can become overwhelming, especially if you're a new parent. Where do I start?
Lives, you just kind of focus on it. Yeah.
And we say, well, here's the 3 things that we would say you want to start here.
Very good. Well, appreciate having you on the program. And David and Kelli Pritchard, I certainly appreciate your participation, and we're just simply out of time. So again, I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.